Hi, and welcome to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker. I direct the creative writing program here at Brookdale, and I'm part of the English faculty. Today on our show, I am super excited to have National Book Award winner Terrance Hayes with us. Terrance is the author of 5 collections of poetry, Lighthead, which was a winner for the National Book Award, and most recently, How to Be Drawn. Also a National Book Award finalist, a National Critics Circle Award finalist, a winner of an NAACP Image Award, and others. Terrance is a winner of numerous honors, including a MacArthur Fellowship, and we are really excited to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
Welcome, welcome.
Thanks.
I wanted to start talking to you about, you're both an artist and a writer, and actually this is your work on the cover of the book. And so I wanted to ask you about the connection between the two. Is there a connection, or are they sort of silo things? How does one feed the other?
For a long time, I've kept them very separate. So, I mean, I like art because I don't have to have words. So I usually go to it as a place to not think, because I am pretty much obsessing over language the rest of the time. But more recently, even like this week, I was working on a poetics essay, and I started thinking about Gwendolyn Brooks. So I stopped, and I think I spent like 3 days just drawing pictures of Gwendolyn Brooks. And the week before, I was working on a piece about Langston Hughes, and I did the same thing. So I think that something's going on more recently where I'm sort of trying to figure out how I can bring those two things together. And maybe the last book was the beginning of that kind of process. So more and more I'm trying to wed them, but I typically was not so interested in that.
Was there one that's primary?
Well, writing, I mean, I will say, I was a fine arts major, and for a long time I thought that I was a better visual artist than a poet, just because poetry's hard and it's not sort of the thing you can
A lot
master.
of people would say visual artist too.
Yeah, it is, but I had a better sort of like technical facility with it, because I've done art and taken classes really since the 3rd grade. It's a thing that I had done longer and more intensely than writing, and it just, at some point, that crossed over.
Yeah.
So I still, I usually will take a figure drawing class at least twice a week. So I have stacks of, drawings and ink, and every now and again I'll put something on my website, but I generally, it's just a practice more than anything else. I'll do them on like cards and send them out to folks, or scan them and then send them out to folks. So I don't really keep it. I'm not doing it because I want to be in a museum, but it is a way to think, and it is a way really ultimately to see, to get back to your point. I find that that regular practice of just figure drawing usually helps with the writing.
It does. Yeah. And don't you have a new book coming out, which actually is merging, about Etheridge Night?
I do, yeah. And it was the same thing, just over the years. Usually when I'm drawing stuff, Frank O'Hara, this is just like what would a nerd poet draw if he was drawing. So if I say I make a living as a poet, and I recognize the deep relationship I have to poetry. So when I'm drawing, just casually with no kind of like mindset or doodling, it's usually Baraka, or, as I said, Walt Whitman, Gwendolyn Brooks, and they're just so drawings that I would just do. Michael S. Harper, Sylvia Plath, and so when this opportunity for the book came together, it began with that. And I was like, well, I always am drawing pictures of Etheridge Night, and so those are in there. But they're also like graphs, illustrations. There's a graphic poem, a poem where I, again, wrote it, and then I tried to illustrate it, and it was
Are there
kind
essays
of a surreal
too?
poem. Yeah, they're mostly essays, and some other kind of weird things. But yeah, lots of essays, and a lot of it, it's me sort of trying to think about him both visually and in my language.
Does it feed you in different ways? Do you get something different out of painting and drawing versus writing? I mean, because they're both such creative energies of focus.
It's weird to kind of bring this thing up. It comes up all the time, and I always have to say the same thing. So there's a third thing that I do, which would just be like playing the piano. And I guess it was about 20 years ago, moving to New Orleans, and Yusuf Kormanyaka on my way down said to me, have you ever heard of this pianist, James L. Booker? And I was like, no, I'll look him up. And I looked him up, and the first time I heard him, I thought, I'll give up poetry if I can play the piano like this dude. So that's a 20-year relationship. I went out and got a piano like that October. Yusuf told me maybe in August. I remember it. I got a piano and I played it. I still play.
Was that you got a piano without ever having played piano?
Right, no lessons. But I've always wanted. I always thought, like in my heart of hearts, that the piano was my thing. So I always listened to it very deeply. Like Keith Jarrett, Thelonious Monk. It was always my instrument. And so anyways, here's the point. I cannot play the piano. I've been playing for 20 years, and I don't actually want to be able to play it. I just want to like touch it and hear those sounds, and again, have a different sort of relationship to my expressiveness. And so all of it is that. All of it is just a way of making something and trying to stay level that way, is what I say. So I don't really think of it as like products. It's like dancing, like dancing around and saying like, should I turn on the camera because I'm happy dancing, or should I just keep dancing? No one else is in the room. So that kind of motion of expressiveness is what I'm always trying to get to, that kind of just freedom that's not about anything else.
Because as a writer myself, I started to paint and draw, and I'm actually taking a drawing class right now.
Sure, yeah.
And which has made very clear I should not quit my day job.
Figure drawing?
No. Just doing a pot is killing me. No way.
Yeah,
I really should not quit my day job.
Sure.
But I found that I have so much fun because I stink, and I'm really clear on that. So I have no expectations the same way I would if I were writing, but it's another way to access the same intensity of focus.
Sure, totally.
Without having the stakes be the same.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about drawing a person versus drawing like a pie is it sort of doesn't matter because, you are a person, so you can kind of make anything you want when you, like if I look at you and I just go across the room and draw you, it'll still be, it's like my impression of you, so that can't be wrong. But if I look at a pie and I go draw it and it's like an apple or it's a shoe instead of a pie.
Eggs are hard.
No one's going to say like, oh, I like that your pie looks like a shoe. They'll be like, that's not a pie. So I do find like, for me, it's even that, like that I don't even have to make a pie or a person. It's just very like, well, anything I do is going to be right just because, it's one human being looking at another human being. So I'm just trying to avoid even that. I don't even want you to be like, does that look like the person or not? Even that kind of pressure gets me in another space. So I'm just always trying to get to like, it's almost like drawing with your eyes closed. Let's just see.
Well, that was one of my questions, actually, because in How to Be Drawn, I have to look at my thing to say this, and I just did this in my drawing class. There's a poem about blind contour drawing.
Yeah, that's right, which I've always liked for similar reasons. Yeah.
Where you don't look at your paper, and you can't take the pen off of the page.
That's right.
Which is insanely hard. But it made me wonder, is that how you experience a poem?
Me as a reader of a poem?
No, as writing. Your poems travel so much.
Sure,
They cover a lot of ground.
Right.
And I don't know, is that
I do like that associative nature. So like when you said that that's so hard, like I think that's actually one of the ways to trick yourself to get around a question of difficulty, which is like, well, just don't even look at it. So you don't even know it's hard. You don't even know what you're making. And then by the time you've made your mind up, you're done. You know what I mean? So if you pick the pen up and look, it's like a Orpheus, that's blind contour drawing. Orpheus going up out of the underworld with his lover behind him. So figure drawing is like, well, I assume that what I'm making is going to be okay. And then you look and whatever you made is what it is. So that's an important gesture. I just don't do, even as a teacher, like it's hard or this is good or bad or this is better or worse. I think like, but art doesn't really work like that. It's
Do you
just
try
like, it's
to
right
get out of the
you made
way
it.
of your poems when you're writing?
Yeah,
or is there more
I mean,
intention there?
So again, as a teacher, I would say I do want to do blind contour drawing all the time. But at some point, when you look at it, if you can work on it, if you can fix it, maybe you'll fix it. So that's kind of what revision is. But the impetus should not be too much vision. It should just be like, let's see what happens. So, and I would say historically, I am someone who revises a lot. So even that poem, I mean, I used to have the numbers on it, but it probably went through like 100. I am remembering something. It probably went through about 100 drafts. And I remember that there was maybe it was in parts at one point, and there was a long poem about the Cyclops in the Odyssey. And I had his name in it, which Portendo, I can't even remember it now. And the poem was about how big would a giant's eyeball have to be. So I think it's just a small thing. Maybe I say onion, I don't even remember, or orange. But I'm like, if your eyeball was the size of an onion, that would be a giant. So I was just sort of working out how big would you have to be. Anyway, so when I started drafting the poem, midway through, lots and lots of months of drafts, that all fell out. So now I think maybe it's a sentence or two.
I think there's an
in
onion.
The poem. Yeah. So, but like I love that because I still have the experience, I still have the practice that went into it, and even the practice of like having to cut out something that's interesting to me is a good practice. It helps not be too committed to everything that you're doing. So.
Well, just last question, then I think we'll go to a break. But I think as well, I mean, painting and writing both are incredibly solitary endeavors.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's also kind of stepping back, and in a way, it's putting something between you and the world. And they always say with photographers, it's the camera,
Right.
behind the lens. But I think it's similar for writing and for painting. Partly the intentional awareness of observation.
Sure.
And I wonder if that is what attracts you to these.
So, I mean, most of the stuff that I talk about is just going to be related to my sense of teaching, because teaching is sort of like, would that be the lab space? Like if we're artists, if we're writers, and we do this thing that has a kind of mystery into it, that's always hard. Like if it ain't hard, you're probably not really working, right? So it's going to be hard, and it should be hard. And probably that's going to be true for like a real pianist and a real painter. But I know that so deeply with language that it's such a struggle to just get yourself there, that I like the places where I don't have to do it. But let's say it's hard. So I think if that's true, if most of what you're doing is going to be a challenge, you're just looking at a kind of constant productivity. I don't think you want to stop too much to meditate on what you're doing or how you're doing it. So, I mean, is that answering the question? I feel like I'm sort of saying what I've said.
No, it is. Well, we're going to have to go to a break anyways. So,
sure.
But I like that idea. I like how they cross for you. I'm looking forward to
I'm saying they kind of do and they
book.
kind of don't, and I just sort of wait to see. And I mean, if I'm filling that idea out before we go, it's just the notion that, like, in teaching though, most of the stuff that I talk about in terms of writing process comes from teaching, where I have to kind of express it to other writers. But in my normal productivity, it's a mystery. Like,
why dig too deep?
Yeah. So
on that note, we'll take a break. We're talking with Terrance Hayes, and we will be right back. Please join us after the break. Thanks. Hi, and welcome back to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series. My name is Suzanne Parker, and I am here talking with National Book Award winner and author of How to Be Drawn, Terrance Hayes. So welcome back.
Good to be here.
So before the break, we were talking about sort of the shape of these things, and I wanted to ask if you would share a poem.
Sure. Do you want me to give you some lead in on this?
Sure.
Usually by the time these books are in my hand, I will read them, but I usually am just sort of working on something else. So what's interesting about this poem, A Machine, and this other sonnet, so this is, a mock sonnet is what I'll call it, and the other sonnet that's in this book, they're really the only really short poems in a book of really long poems. That was part of like the project of kind of drawing a line or drawing a kind of like an idea out. But of course now what I'm mostly doing is a continuation of this sort of what is a sonnet question. So one of the sonnets is American Sonnet for Wanda C. Wanda Coleman, who wrote this series of poems that were American sonnets. And then this one, A Machine, is like answering machine, American machine, a machine. So the point I guess I would be making here is that sometimes these things that you aren't thinking you're really super deep into become the seeds of some other kind of notion.
Before you read, it's a period machine,
That's
right?
right.
Why the period?
Because maybe it's an abbreviation for something like an answer machine or so.
Gotcha.
And again, like what I like the kind of ways that people sort of process that A period.
Yeah.
But here's the poem. Hey, I am learning what it means to ride condemned. I may be breaking up. I'm doing 85 outside the kingdom of heaven, under the overpass and passed over. The past is over, and I'm over the past. My odometer is broken. Can you help me? When you get this message, I may be a half-ton crush, a half-tone of mist and mystery, maybe trooper bait with the ambulance ambling somewhere, or a dial of holy stations, a bandage of clamor and spooling, a dash and semaphore, a pupil of motion, on my way to be buried or planted or crammed or creamed, treading light and water or tread and trepidation, maybe. Hey, I am backfiring along a road through the future with I am alive skidding across my tongue. When you get this message, you will sigh, my lover is gone.
I love the last line. Thank you so much for reading.
You're welcome.
When I think about your work, I definitely do think about so much play with language, circling, and even back from your first books, just clearly a sense of having fun.
Sure.
Even when the stakes are extremely high,
Right.
there often seems to be this riffing going on. And I wonder, I know once Mark Doty had talked about image as what draws him first into a poem.
Right.
And as a visual artist, I would think, oh, it's probably image.
Sure.
But what is it?
So this would be my typical thing. And again, if picking up a thread here, I can say to you what I would say to my students, which is like, oh, you know, beggars can't be choosers. So sometimes it's a sound, a sentence, a word. Sometimes it is an image or a gesture, somebody like picking a bag up. And so I generally try to keep track of all of that, and then whatever sort of lingers, the thing that I'm remembering, whether I've written it down or not, for example, or the thing that I've written down and I keep asking myself, is that the right sentence for that? Is what I do. So an extension of that would be like, so you know, I write on my phone, I write in notebooks, I write in art books, I write on paper, off paper, and then sometimes I lose stuff and I think, oh, that's all right, you know, if I remember it, if it was enough, sometimes that stuff still comes back to me. So I guess what I'm saying to you is like, oh, you know, I try not to keep too much track of it. If I think that I'm mostly making poems by just hearing sounds, then I'll try to do a little bit more looking instead of listening.
Oh, that's interesting, to balance that.
Yeah, you know, so usually as soon as I can figure out some sort of habit, I'm usually trying to figure out how to do something different with that. And that would just be a personality thing, but I do try to teach it. It is what I believe. It's like all I know in terms of teaching. So yeah, as a teacher, I would never say, oh, you should only begin with the image. I would be like, hey man, start how you start, and then we'll see what happens. Maybe you can put some imagery in it when you revise it, or maybe you can put some alliteration in it when you revise it. But in terms of expressing it, just go wherever you need to go to get it out.
Yeah, because consistently across your books, there is this great range in concerns, but also just in the leaping and the fun of it. In How to Be Drawn, it does seem to bring together, I mean, it's in the title, the art and the writing as well, but there's so much experimentation in there with form. You've got Q&As with no cues. You've got, it's the Etheridge night, a poem as a police record. You've got graphs, you've got lists. Yeah, I guess, what's your relationship to form or experimentation?
In each of those cases, though, I would say they were just around. So even the police report poem that is in this book, I had written that poem by the time that I had written Lighthead, but I just didn't know that it was a poem. I mean, I wrote it and I sort of looked at it and I had fun, and it was connected to the ongoing project. And I think maybe a version of it is even going to be in this Etheridge Night book. So I had been working on the Etheridge Night book for maybe 10 years, so that felt part of that work. And I wasn't sure if it would go in the book. And then, again, just thinking about like patterns, I realized that I'd had an Etheridge Night poem in every other book. So my first book has a night poem, my third book has a night poem, The Blue Etheridge, and then this was the fifth book. So then I was like, oh, maybe I'll put it in there just for the hell of it because it's a kind of rhythm. But does that mean anything? Does anybody care? Would anybody like write about that anywhere? It doesn't matter. But I'd had the poem for a while, and what I'm saying is I wrote it because that's what experimenting is. Like experimenting means you're not, maybe it's going to be terrible, maybe it's going to fail, maybe no one will ever see it, and I do have a lot of experiments that no one will ever see, but sometimes that's just what you need to get to that space.
How do you choose, because you're also the creator of The Golden Shovel, right?
Same thing though, same thing. I mean, there's a long backstory to that, but in essence, I was trying to get my 5-year-old to remember the poem. And then when I did my normal writing, I just had written it down because I could remember it. I had memorized it so much and trying to get him to.
We're talking about Real Cool,
Yeah, I had memorized the poem because I was trying to get him to memorize it. So I was like writing, and before I wrote, I was like, I bet I even know that poem by now. So then I wrote it down, and I was like, oh, I should just fill it out. I was thinking about my dad and the pool halls, and so I did it. And then later, people came around and were like, Peter Kahn and Patricia Smith and Ravi came along and they were like, we want to do an anthology. And I said, man, I'm done. I mean, I've already written that poem. One. Yeah, and so they still did it anyway.
They did, it's the Golden Shovel.
Yeah, and I did the foreword. But again, it was sort of the thing. And I haven't done any more since then, I guess is what I would say to you. Like, I don't think of it as...
Do you think of it as play?
Yeah, I do, and as ephemeral as play. So I'm not trying to make forms. I'm not trying to like invent, the American sonnet, but I do like to think about it, and I like to play with the notion of it. Like, what would an American sonnet be, or what would a crime report be? But I'm saying like, play means if I fail at it, there's just it's okay. It just means like it's practice is even probably. I mean, I guess I would talk about it more closely to that. Like practice means you can play, but you also got to sweat a little bit if you think about like the notion of like practicing sports. So there's just less stakes in practice than in the game. So I just don't think about the game. If the book is the game, the thing that is the result of all of that practice, I mostly just say, I'm going to see if I can do a 360 dunk. You know, one time I did, only once in my life. But it was like, okay, I'll never do it again, but only in practice can I be relaxed enough to even try that. But would I try that on a fast break in a game? But again, so you get some of that stuff. And sometimes in the writing process, it means you get some of the evidence that's in that book, I guess.
Now, American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin.
That's
Do I
right.
have it? It's coming out this summer, right?
That's right.
Sonnets, I'm assuming?
Something like that, American sonnets, whatever that is.
Are you making up your own sonnet form?
What I will say to you is that there's
wait and see the book.
there's 70, and I think all of them are just sort of playing around with that definition. And the assassin, the notion of the assassin each time. But the poem in this book, American Sonnet for Wanda C., was me writing to her because she had written all these American sonnets. So at that time, whenever that book came out, it was just me playing with like the intensity in her work and trying to get to that space. And I feel like I sent it to her before she passed away. And then I started up again writing what I thought were sonnets. I mean, sonnets are just sort of easy practice because we kind of know what it is. You know you're going to have some music in it. You think you're going to have a turn if you're just thinking out the basic rules. So that's the kind of easy form. I mean, I think there's sonnets in every book. Even a book that has the project of the long poem has sonnets in it. So when I started up again, I just thought like, oh, I think these are still American sonnets because I'm still trying to push the form the way that I think she was pushing it. And so, so the book is dedicated to her because, I mean, she's underneath it, even if it's a response to like, I started writing him right after Trump was elected. So a lot of it does have to do with America and, you know, assassins and loops in history, the future seeming to always be just around the corner. The past is always just around the corner. People, you know, so there's a lot of that. But again, at the core of it is just me thinking about like Wanda Coleman's American Sonnets and saying, what is that? Let me see if I can do that. So
are
they
any of
sonnets?
them an actual traditional sonnet?
What is a traditional sonnet though? Like whatever you put an adjective in front of it, Petrarchan sonnet, Shakespearean sonnet, Milton sonnets, even Robert Hayden, the poet, wrote sonnets quite a bit, and I think he had a kind of sonnet form that he was
I guess I would go
exercising.
with the big three people are studying in their 7th grade class.
Sure. The thing that I was most compelled by, and this is again an extension of just a personality tick, would just be turns. So I mean, I do like turns. If you were to look at the poems that I edit for like even the New York Times, you would see there's always, you know, you start in, I don't know, Alabama and end up in Zebra, that kind of thing. So a poem that can get me from Alabama to Zebra, that's always an interesting journey. And so in the form, the consistent thing is the volta, which is what that turn is. So I appreciate that. Whatever sonnet form that has some principle where you got to change your mind or make a turn in your thinking.
I can see that very much because your work twirls.
Sure,
it's doing pirouettes.
Well, sometimes I'm trying to see how many times can I turn in 14 lines, and so there's some exercises like that in there. But like
when
the
can
one
we
time,
expect the books?
when
Yeah.
it'll be
American
out
Sonnets is coming
in the
out
summer,
when?
in June of this summer, I think, and then the other book will be in the fall.
The fall?
So here's the thing. I mean, this is still an extension of everything. You know, I'm still writing them. Just last night, I was like, can I finish this American Sonnet to try out on y'all? I didn't finish it, but I do. One of my goals through the whole process was like, can I do a sonnet that's one sentence? And so there are a few almost near successes in the book, is what I would say. And people will be generous and be like, oh yeah, that sounded like one sentence. But a few weeks ago, I actually did one that was like a real, legitimate one sentence poem that loosely follows the rhythm and structure of a sonnet. But you know, it ain't gonna be in the book because that goal is sort of outside the realm of like, does it matter if it's in the book or not? But I did it.
Well, congratulations. And on that sentence,
thanks.
it has been such a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
And I do urge you to go get Terrance's books. And if you'd like to know more about the creative writing program here at Brookdale, where anyone could take creative writing classes, check out our website, www.brookdalecc.edu. And thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks.